I walked into my bedroom and found my dad holding my wife's hand. Then they asked me to stay married while they lived their love in secret. You know, sometimes life throws you a curveball, and other times, it just shatters your entire world into a million pieces. Imagine walking in on the person you loved, the one you pledged forever to, in an intimate moment with your own father. That's what happened to me. And it absolutely pulverized everything I thought I knew about love, family, and betrayal. I'd actually gotten off work early that day, system crash, the whole 9 yards. I remember feeling this almost giddy happiness. I grabbed takeout from our favorite Thai spot, dreaming of surprising my wife with lunch. We'd been married 2 years, and yeah, things weren't always sunshine and roses, but I genuinely believed we were solid. I never, not for a second, had a reason to think otherwise. But the moment I pulled into our driveway, something felt off. My dad's car was parked a few houses down. I knew it was his. He'd just gotten it detailed, obsessively cleaned it. At first, I figured maybe he'd just stopped by to drop something off. But the engine was off. No sign of him anywhere. When I walked into the house, it was just too quiet. The TV was on, but the volume was barely a whisper. My wife wasn't in the living room. Then I saw them. 2 coffee mugs on the table, both half full. I didn't call out her name. I don't know why. I think, deep down, my gut already knew. I climbed the stairs, each step heavy, slow. I could hear muffled voices coming from our bedroom. Her voice. And my dad's. I froze, standing right outside our door. My mind raced, trying to find any other explanation. Maybe they were watching a movie? Talking about something serious? But I couldn't stop myself. I pushed the door open. And there they were. They weren't doing it. Not in that moment. But it was still incredibly intimate. They were sitting close on the bed, facing each other, hands intertwined, foreheads touching. It was like some slow, tender embrace you see in a movie. They didn't even react when the door creaked open. It was as if they knew I'd come home early. My wife looked up first. Her face wasn't etched with guilt or fear. Just this weird, unsettling calm. Then my dad looked at me, almost as if I had interrupted something inconvenient, but not entirely unexpected. They didn't scramble. They didn't even try to explain. Instead, my dad stood up slowly and said, "We need to sit down." I couldn't speak. My throat was suddenly dry, constricted. I just followed them to the dining room like I was sleepwalking, my takeout bag and my keys still clutched in my hands. My wife started talking. She said what I'd walked in on wasn't what it looked like, but that she owed me honesty. She admitted she and my dad had known each other long before I ever met her. They'd been friends. Close friends. Too close. According to her, they had a complicated past and never really got closure. My voice cracked when I asked, "Are you having an affair?" My dad looked me straight in the eye. He said, "It's more than that." He claimed they had an emotional connection that never went away. And over time, they'd realized they were still in love. I felt like I was trapped in a bad movie, waiting for someone to yell, "It's a prank," or some twisted test. But then my wife chimed in, saying they didn't want to hurt me. That was the worst part. They said it so sincerely, as if that somehow counted for something. My dad, ever the pragmatist, then suggested this didn't have to turn into a disaster. He said we were all adults. We could find a mature solution. A solution? I asked what kind of solution he was talking about. He proposed we stay legally married, but just live separate lives. No messy divorce, no family feud. We could keep the peace. He even framed it like a win for everyone. I'd be free to date again. She'd eventually move out, and we could figure out how to split things slowly, privately, without embarrassment. No scandal, no drama, just a quiet transition. Have you both lost your minds? I asked, though it felt more like a croak. My wife, the nerve of her, reached for my hand. She said she still cared for me deeply, just not in that way anymore. She didn't want to lose me completely, said I meant too much. She even suggested we could redefine what our relationship looked like, because it didn't have to be black and white. I just stood up and walked out. I didn't even grab my keys. I walked for hours, just kept putting one foot in front of the other until I ended up in a park near my office. I sat on a bench, staring blankly, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. How long had this been going on? Had it ever truly stopped? Was I just a placeholder, a warm-up act before the real show? That night, I didn't go home. I crashed at my friend Lucas's place and just told him everything. He thought I was lying at first. Then he just stared at me, jaw dropped, and asked what I was going to do. I told him I didn't know. I couldn't process any of it. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. In the suffocating quiet, it all started to click. The weird tension between my wife and my dad. The way she'd sometimes light up when he walked in, more than what felt appropriate. The family jokes about how alike they were. How my dad was always around, helping her fix something, even when I was ready to do it. How my wife never minded when he stayed late. Maybe I had been a fool. Or maybe, just maybe, I trusted the absolute wrong people. By the third night, a cold clarity settled over me. I decided I needed to start putting things in motion. I called a lawyer. Because whatever fantasy they thought they had, whatever peace they wanted to preserve, they were about to learn what real consequences looked like. Update 1 * for a whole week, I didn't answer their calls or texts. I stayed at Lucas's place, grateful he didn't pry unless I felt like talking. Most days, I just sat on his back porch, staring at his overgrown yard, wondering how my life had warped into some sick parody. I went to work like a zombie. On the 8th day, I finally responded. I told them I'd come by to get some of my things, and I didn't want a conversation. I just wanted space. That seemed to trigger a full-blown panic because suddenly my phone wouldn't stop blowing up. My wife sent this long, rambling message about how hurt she was that I hadn't let her explain. She said she understood my anger, but insisted that what they were offering was the most compassionate option for everyone. Compassionate. That word echoed in my head for hours. What kind of person uses compassionate to describe betraying their husband with his own father? When I finally did go back to the house, I brought Lucas with me. I didn't trust myself to be alone in that house, especially not with them. My dad had a way of making me feel small, even when I hadn't done anything wrong. And my wife, well, she had her own perverse talent for making betrayal sound like a misunderstanding. The moment I walked through the door, it was like stepping onto a stage set. My wife had cleaned the place top to bottom. She'd even baked cookies, like this was some sitcom apology. My dad was lounging in the armchair, looking annoyingly casual, as if he was hosting Sunday dinner instead of the total fallout of our lives. My wife asked if we could talk. I told her flatly, I'm not here for a chat, just to grab some documents and a few essentials. But of course, they couldn't help themselves. My dad stood up and launched into this whole speech about how he hadn't planned for things to happen this way. He said he didn't expect to fall for her again, that it was complicated and painful for him, too. He still wanted me in his life and hoped I'd consider their proposal. Their proposal? Like this was some merger between business partners, not a knife in my back. My wife chimed in, talking about how this arrangement didn't have to change our legal status right away, that we could avoid expensive lawyers and public messes if we just stayed civil and respected each other's boundaries. She even had the audacity to say we'd be living our truth, and that was something to be proud of. Lucas actually laughed out loud. He didn't even try to hide it. I said almost nothing. I just walked past them, grabbed the folder I needed from my office, and packed a small duffel bag with some clothes and toiletries. My wife followed me from room to room, still trying to explain. She said, yes, it was wrong, but feelings aren't always convenient. She said they didn't want to lose me, that she still cared. I stopped, looked her dead in the eye, and finally spoke. If you cared about me, I told her, you wouldn't have made me the last to know. You could have walked away, filed for divorce, ended things clean. I pointed at my dad. But instead, you chose to lie. Every single day, you chose my father. And you still expect me to sit down and break bread with you too, like this is just some big misunderstanding. She cried when I said that. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears. And I didn't feel a single drop of sympathy. Before I left, I turned to both of them. Whatever fantasy you've built together, I said, my voice steady, I want no part of it. You two deserve each other. But you don't deserve me. And then I walked out. Later that night, Lucas and I went to a bar. I needed something stronger than coffee and more crowded than his living room. As we sat there, the words finally spilled out. I'm going to file for divorce. Lucas nodded. It's the right move, he said. Then he asked if I'd tell the rest of the family. That question hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't even thought about my mom, my siblings, my cousins. None of them knew yet. And when they found out, I had no idea whose side they'd take. I just told them I wasn't ready for that. I needed to figure out how to survive the next few days without falling completely apart. By the time we got back to his place, I had 2 new messages waiting for me. One from my wife, one from my dad. Both long, both carefully worded, talking about forgiveness and maturity and second chances. They still believe there was a version of this that could work for all of us. That was the moment it hit me. They weren't just hoping I'd go along with it. They expected me to. They thought I'd be so afraid of losing my family or causing drama that I'd just stay quiet, suck it up, and nod my head like a good little doormat. I stared at those messages until 2 in the morning. Then I opened a blank reply. I wrote exactly one sentence. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Update 2 asterisk after that night. I didn't open another message from either of them. I didn't block them, though. My lawyer said it was smart to keep a full record, just in case. I was starting to think smarter. In the quiet moments, I kept waiting for the shock to wear off. Some part of me thought I'd wake up and feel numb, detached, like this was someone else's nightmare. But instead, it stayed sharp. Every single day felt like trying to hold my breath underwater while pretending nothing had changed. The worst part was pretending in front of other people. I hadn't told my mom yet. She and my dad had divorced over a decade ago. She was finally happy in her own life. The last thing I wanted was to drag her back into his mess. But the longer I stayed silent, the more it ate away at me. It all came to a head at a family dinner 2 weeks later. It was one of those informal Sunday potlucks my aunt hosted. Half the family catching up, kids yelling. I almost skipped it, but then I thought, asterisk, why should I stay away? I haven't done anything wrong. Asterisk, I showed up with a store-bought pie. I didn't have the energy to cook. The moment I walked in, I felt the shift. A couple of my cousins looked at me a little too long. My aunt offered me a glass of wine, but wouldn't make eye contact. Then I saw him. My dad. He was already there. And sitting right next to him, her, my wife, laughing with someone, acting like she belonged there. I nearly turned around and walked out. But something in me just snapped. If this was the game they were playing, this public rollout, like nothing had happened, I wasn't just going to fade into the background and let them own the narrative. I walked straight up to the table, pulled up a chair across from them, and said, I'm surprised to see both of you here. My dad smiled, like we were just catching up over coffee. He said he figured it was time to be honest with the family, that transparency would help everyone move on. My wife just sat there, stiff, like she'd rehearsed for this moment, and wasn't quite sure if she should speak. So, I did it for them. I stood up, looked around the entire table, and said, loud and clear, I caught them cheating. My dad and my wife have been together behind my back for who knows how long. I told them about their deal, their generous proposal where I would stay legally married and just play dumb to keep the family at peace. Silence. Nobody said a word. My aunt looked horrified. My cousin's jaw dropped. My mom wasn't there that night, thankfully. I don't think I could have handled her reaction. My dad tried to jump in, to say I was twisting things, that he and my wife had reconnected emotionally and hadn't meant to hurt me, but that adults should be able to handle mature relationships. I cut him off. What kind of mature relationship, I asked him, my voice shaking, involves sneaking around and sleeping with your son's wife? That's when the room started moving again. A few people got up. One of my uncles asked my wife if it was true. She just nodded, mumbled something about things got complicated. Complicated. That was the word she used for blowing up 2 relationships and turning a family upside down. I left after that. I'd said what I needed to say. I didn't wait to see who stayed at the table with them or who walked away. I figured people would make up their own minds. I wasn't going to beg for sides. The fallout came in waves. Some relatives called and texted me later that night, saying they couldn't believe it. A few apologized for not seeing it sooner. Others stayed suspiciously quiet, probably trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing. My dad sent me another long message the next morning, saying I'd handled things poorly and shamed the family with my dramatic outburst. That actually made me laugh. Shamed the family, as if what I exposed was worse than what they'd done. My wife, for her part, sent me a shorter message. She said she was sorry that things had to be this way and hoped one day I'd understand how hard it had been for her to choose between 2 people she loved. I didn't respond. I gave my lawyer the go-ahead to start the divorce paperwork. He warned me it might get messy since we hadn't been married that long and didn't have a prenup. I told him I didn't care about the furniture or the bank account or any of it. I just wanted my name off the papers. I wanted my life back. That weekend, I took a long drive out to the coast. I needed air that didn't feel tainted. I walked along the water until the sun went down and thought about how I'd been manipulated into believing that peace was worth sacrificing myself. But peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from truth. And if telling the truth makes me the villain in their story, then so be it. They weren't heroes to begin with. Update 3 asterisk in the week after that dinner, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Some messages were short, people saying they were shocked or sorry. A few came from distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly interested in offering their version of support. But most of the family stayed silent. And the ones who weren't silent? Oh, they had opinions. My uncle, who's my father's brother and one of the more vocal ones, sent me a wall of texts saying I should have kept things private. He said everyone had secrets, and airing dirty laundry at a family gathering was immature. He ended it by saying he didn't want to choose sides, but I'd forced his hand. I didn't bother replying. Let him have his neutrality. I wasn't looking for a crowd behind me. I just wasn't going to play along with the idea that silence equals maturity. What really gutted me, though, was hearing from my mom. She called me after one of my cousins filled her in. She said she wished I had told her directly instead of hearing it through them. But she also said she wasn't surprised. She said she'd lived with that version of my dad for decades and had spent years convincing herself she was the crazy one. She didn't ask for details. She just said she loved me and that I needed to take care of myself. That call helped me more than I realized in the moment. Meanwhile, my soon-to-be ex-wife and my dad had gone full steam ahead with whatever fantasy world they were trying to build. They posted a photo together at some family-friendly outdoor event. The caption talked about new beginnings and forgiveness. It was nauseating, like watching people decorate a house built on a graveyard. I knew they were trying to control the narrative, to make it look like they were the ones being strong, overcoming adversity together. I didn't engage, but I also wasn't going to let them rewrite what happened. When the divorce papers were finally served to her, she tried calling. I didn't pick up. Then she messaged, saying she hoped we could talk things through and maybe pause the proceedings until emotions cooled down. I forwarded it to my lawyer and told him to proceed. I'd lived for months under a roof where she'd pretended to be someone else. Someone who laughed at my jokes, who kissed me goodnight, who called me her husband while probably texting my father behind my back. That kind of betrayal doesn't cool down. It just burns through whatever pieces of you are still soft. She kept trying. More messages came, a couple of long ones explaining how she never meant to hurt me, and that she was confused for a long time. But she finally followed her heart. She said she knew this was hard for me, but she hoped one day I could forgive her. That was the moment I realized just how deeply she didn't get it. She thought this was a love triangle, some sad emotional misstep that could be chalked up to timing or chemistry or fate. She didn't see the absolute wreckage left behind. Not just the broken trust, but the power dynamics, the manipulation, the insidious way they tried to corner me into accepting their fantasy so they wouldn't have to carry the guilt. It wasn't a love story. It was a betrayal soaked in arrogance. Around that time, my dad tried again too. He left a voicemail, saying he still wanted to find a way forward. He said that, no matter what happened, we were still blood, and he refused to let this tear us apart permanently. I ignored the message without listening to the end. Let me be clear, this wasn't about revenge. I wasn't looking to destroy their lives or expose them just for sport. I just wanted to stop pretending. I wanted to reclaim my space in the family without having to plaster on a smile while sitting across the table from 2 people who had thrown me under the bus and then acted like I should thank them for it. And yet, even after everything, part of me kept waiting for the guilt to show up. I thought maybe I'd feel bad about how public it all got, about how my decision to speak up created all these ripples. But guilt never came, not in the way I expected. What had come were moments of peace. I'd wake up and realize I didn't have to second-guess the way my wife looked at her phone. I didn't have to wonder why my dad acted so overinvested in my marriage. I didn't have to carry the weight of trying to please everyone while breaking my own back. One afternoon, I sat outside a coffee shop with a friend I hadn't seen in a while. He asked how I was doing, genuinely, not the small talk kind of check-in. I told him the truth, that some days were ugly, quiet, and lonely, but that every day also felt a little more mine. He said that sounded like healing. I think he was right. But the thing about healing is that it's not always graceful. Sometimes it looks like blocking numbers. Sometimes it sounds like screaming into a pillow. Sometimes it means deleting every photo and starting over. And sometimes, More often than we admit, healing means letting people think you're bitter just so you can finally be free. Update 4 asterisk, I honestly thought the worst of it was behind me. Right now, I'm staying opposite Lucas. His neighbor wanted to rent the house, so it worked out perfectly. I came home from work one day, and there was a letter taped to my front door. Not mailed, not slid under, but taped, like a threat pretending to be an invitation. It was from my father. He wrote that he didn't expect me to forgive him overnight, but he hoped we could talk like adults. He went on to say that he and my ex were considering a future together and wanted to do it with my blessing. He wrote that they would never truly be happy if they knew I was still hurting, that they needed peace in the family. The sheer arrogance in that letter made my skin crawl. He still saw himself as the peacemaker, even after what he did. He still imagined this whole thing as some tragic misunderstanding that needed to be hugged into submission. It made me realize something. He didn't feel guilty. He felt inconvenienced. He wasn't sorry for betraying me. He was just tired of me refusing to get over it. I didn't respond. I threw the letter in the trash. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. What kind of man cheats with his son's wife, before the wedding, during the marriage, and after the split, and then has the audacity to ask for a blessing? Like this was a church ceremony and not a crime scene. The anger started creeping back in, slowly but surely. I'd been so focused on cutting ties that I hadn't even allowed myself to process just how twisted all of it truly was. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the unbelievable nerve it took for both of them to sit me down and suggest that we all work it out for the sake of the family. They didn't want healing. They wanted silence. It took another week before I got another message, this time from my cousin Julie. She said she'd run into my dad and his new girlfriend at a restaurant downtown. She said they were laughing, holding hands, acting like a newlywed couple. My dad had introduced her by saying they were just thankful everything worked out in the end. Worked out. I read those words 5 times before I could even move. That was when something inside me cracked. I couldn't let them go around acting like this was a happy accident. I wasn't going to write a memoir or start a Facebook post war, but I couldn't just let the narrative be whatever they wanted. So, I started putting together everything I had. Messages, dates, photos, that awful letter he wrote. I fished it out of the trash later. I was making a paper trail. Something that, if ever questioned, could back up the truth. Not because I wanted to ruin them, but because I needed to know that if one more person ever asked me, "Well, are you sure it happened like that?" I could say yes. Yes, I'm sure. And here's why. It was around that time that a mutual friend, a guy I hadn't heard from since the wedding, reached out to grab coffee. I hesitated, but said yes. I think I just wanted to hear someone say something normal for once, something that didn't involve betrayal or second chances or peace in the family. He asked how I'd been, and I told him the short version. He didn't say much, just nodded slowly, and then said something I'll never forget. He said he'd known something was off the day of the wedding. He saw my dad give her a look. Not a protective look, not even a proud look. Something possessive. He said it gave him chills. But what do you say at a wedding? He asked. You just convince yourself you imagined it. I didn't know whether to feel validated or sick. We sat in silence for a bit after that. Then he said if I ever needed anything, a place to crash, a weekend getaway, someone to play cards with, he was there. I thanked him. And I meant it. Still, by the time I got home that night, the weight of everything just came crashing down. You don't think betrayal is going to break you until it does. You imagine yourself rising above it, walking away with your head high, becoming the bigger person. But sometimes being the bigger person feels like being the loneliest one in the room. I lay in bed, thinking about all the memories I couldn't unsee. Family dinners, birthday parties, movie nights on the couch. All the moments they probably shared long before I caught on. All the smiles that now felt rotten from the inside out. And the worst part? I still hadn't even told some people why we split. I was so used to protecting everyone else from discomfort that I forgot to protect myself from the burden of carrying all the truth alone. But not anymore. The next morning, I drafted a letter. Not public, just for close family and friends who deserve to know what really happened. I told them the truth. Not the embellished version, not the dramatized one. Just the truth. I said I wasn't asking anyone to pick sides, but I wouldn't stay silent anymore. I said I had nothing to hide, and that I hoped moving forward, people would stop asking why I seemed so distant lately. I didn't sign it bitterly or go on a rant. I just told the truth. And I hit send. Update 5 asterisk. It had been 3 months since I sent out that letter, explaining everything. 3 months of silence from my father. 3 months of radio static from her. 3 months of quiet shifts in my social circle as friends, family, and acquaintances rearranged themselves based on what they now knew. Some reached out with disbelief. Some apologized for not noticing. And some disappeared altogether, uncomfortable with the truth now sitting plainly in front of them. Honestly, I didn't miss any of them. What I did miss was my home. Not the place I was renting now, though it served its purpose. But the house. The one I bought 5 years ago. The one I'd spent my weekends on, one project at a time. The one with the garden I'd planted, the patio I'd built, and the walls I'd painted with her back, when I still thought love meant something permanent. When I left after that night, the night they sat me down like it was some family meeting and not a complete betrayal, I hadn't even packed a full bag. I just walked out, not trusting myself to stay calm if I spent one more minute inside that space we once called ours. I figured I'd come back for the rest once the dust settled. But then it hit me. It was my house, bought under my name, my money, my down payment, my everything. The only reason she was still staying there comfortably was because I hadn't reclaimed the property. I had been too stunned, too heartbroken, too busy surviving to fight for it. But not anymore. I called my lawyer the next day and asked what it would take to secure the house. He asked if I had any documents proving it was mine. I told him the house was bought before the marriage. I had the mortgage, title, and everything solely in my name. When we got married, she had insisted on adding her name to the mailbox, not the deed, and I didn't think much of it. It felt like a small thing at the time. He told me, with a tone I hadn't heard from him before, that it was going to be a very clean case. She tried to stall, of course. Sent her lawyer back with questions, claimed emotional distress, said she had grown attached to the home and felt entitled to half its value. My lawyer shut it down quickly. There was no gray area, no shared ownership, nothing in her name, no payments made from her account. I was more generous than I needed to be, offering her 30 days to pack up and leave. Not because I owed her anything, but because I didn't want her making a scene or trashing the place out of spite. I told her, through her lawyer, that if anything in the house was missing or damaged, I'd pursue it legally. She didn't reply after that. Update 6 asterisk. The divorce took 6 months in total. And honestly, it was the most peaceful part of this entire mess. When I finally held those papers in my hands, stamped, sealed, official, I just sat there in my car, in the driveway of my house, and stared at it. 2 years of lies, undone in 12 pages. I stepped inside that house for the first time since the day everything fell apart. It was eerie at first, like walking into a memory that didn't know it had died. Her things were gone, but her scent lingered faintly in the air. There was an emptiness to the space now, but I welcomed it. It meant I could fill it with something real. A week later, I started repainting the walls. Not because they needed it, but because I did. Every stroke felt like closing a door. Every coat of paint felt like setting fire to old, fake happiness. I sold the couch, got a new rug, replaced the curtains she liked with ones I actually wanted. It was slow, but it was mine. I still hadn't spoken to my father or her, and I didn't plan to. I heard from Julie, my cousin, that they weren't together anymore. Apparently, she didn't like the way he treated her once they were official. Apparently, the guilt he never showed to me found its way to her eventually. I didn't care, because even after everything, I was still standing. I was bruised, yes, but I was finally, truly free.